Okay, all right, so welcome to Let's Talk Turf. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We've got a great presentation lined up for you. My name is Robin Woolsey, and I work for the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District. Part of my job is to help manage the Turf Love program alongside my coworker Bob Winters and some really fantastic Master Gardener volunteers. So before we get started with the presentation, just have a few things to go over. Let's see. There we go. Just a few quick Zoom reminders. I know we've all had quite a few Zoom meetings this year, but just in case, please remember to make sure that you are muted whenever you're not speaking. You can see this image up here on the slide. You'll see these mute and unmute icons in the lower left-hand side of your Zoom window. Please make sure to click on this mute button when you're not speaking so we don't have too much background noise. If you have questions that come up during the presentation, feel free to enter them into the chat box and we'll make sure to get to them at the end. Otherwise, you can save that question until the question and answer period at the end of the presentation, where you can unmute yourself and ask your question directly to Adam. If you would like to, please feel free to turn your video off during the presentation. That way you don't have any distractions on screen, and sometimes that helps with bandwidth and whatnot. So feel free to do that if you're so inclined. And then, like I said, this webinar is being recorded. You will receive a link to the recording via email after the presentation is over. And then lastly, just thank you to our partners. Like I said, this webinar is offered through the Turf Love program. That is a collaborative effort between the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District, the James City County Williamsburg Master Gardeners, and James City County. So I have a link to the Turf Love program if you're interested in learning even more about turf grass, or if you want some specific advice for your lawn. I would encourage you to check this program out. I will include this link in the chat box as well, so you don't have to copy it down right now. And then lastly, of course, thanks to our presenter, Adam Nichols, today. He's with the Hampton Roads Agricultural Research and Extension Center, and we are very grateful for his time this morning. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn things over to Adam.
Thank you, Robin.
Yes.
Good morning. As Robin said, my name is Adam Nichols. I am the Turf Grass and Weed Science Research Manager at the Hampton Roads Agricultural Research and Extension Center located in Virginia Beach. I have been there now since 2007, conducting research on both turf and weed science with many different projects ranging from fertilizer trials, weed efficacy, herbicide efficacy trials, and I deal with all of our variety evaluation trials. So I have a lot of experience on many different types of turf. I also am, as I was telling Robin, I present many times a year to the Master Gardener programs and am one of the people who train the Master Gardeners, especially in the turf grass chapter that they have to go through. So what I am going to be working on today, or talking about today, is we're going to be talking about compost. Okay, compost usage within turf grass, both the benefits of compost and the pitfalls that you may find. First, let's actually define compost. According to Merriam-Webster, compost is a mixture that consists largely of decayed organic matter and is used for fertilizing and conditioning the land. All right, pretty simple, but since the better part of that is actually the decayed organic matter, where do we actually get that decayed organic matter? Well, compost can actually come from a variety of sources. You have a lot of plant material. From your plant material, that decayed material can come from leaves, pine needles, grass clippings. It can come from wood chips, small branches, twigs, any kind of garden waste. or it can come from your agricultural sector. It can be hay, straw, or even in some cases soil pulp that it is composed of. You also have a lot of your agricultural waste, meaning your manure. This manure can be from poultry farms, it can be from bovine farms, being your cows, bulls, sheep. You also have horse farms that can produce quite a bit of manure and get used into composting. And I have even found that they will compost alpaca manure in some cases. So, but it's not only animal waste that we deal with when it comes to compost. We also have to deal with human waste. We have what is pre-consumer waste, which is going to be things like eggshells, any skins of vegetables, or rotten vegetables, rotten fruit that we're not actually consuming ourselves. Then also we have post-consumer waste, which is food scraps, that being any leftover from your meals, any fat, any bones, all of that can actually go into compost. And then also you have biosolids, which are treated human waste. You get those from your sewage plant factories, and they can actually be composted. Now, compost itself, it doesn't have to be only one part of all of these components. A lot of the times what you're going to see is multiple components. Anything that is organic in nature can actually be used for compost.
Hey, Adam.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have slides for this portion?
Are they not up on the screen?
No, I'm not able to
Okay.
slides.
I'm sorry.
The host.
Oh, okay. I'm very, very sorry.
No problem.
Actually hit. Wow.
There we go.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay, can everyone see that now? Okay. I'm very sorry. I forgot to actually hit the share button on that.
No problem.
So, okay. So this is as I was talking about the compost itself. It doesn't have to be any one particular portion of these parts, and then a lot of times you're going to see it is a lot of these components brought together and composted. So the other part of that definition was it is a fertilizer and condition the land, meaning compost is a soil amendment. And as a soil amendment, it actually provides a lot of benefits to the actual soil itself. Number one being, it is a source of organic matter. You need organic matter within the soil to provide the microbial activity that occurs in the soil something to feed on. And that organic matter is going to be very important to feed that microbial activity. That microbial activity will then be able to process nutrients that break down long chain carbohydrates and amino acids into usable forms for the plant. Compost is also going to increase your water holding capacity. This is really important in terms of sandy soils. Sandy soils tend to drain very quickly. And you don't have water, and so when you get into drought periods, turf grass tends to suffer greatly. Adding compost is going to actually increase that water holding capacity so that your turf grass can withstand drought better than it would without it. It's going to increase your nutrient holding capacity. Organic matter in general has a much higher CEC, or cation exchange capacity, than just soils themselves. In fact, in terms of clay, which is the soil that has the highest CEC, organic matter has about 100 times more capability, a higher cation exchange capacity than your typical soils or your clays. So you're going to be able to hold a lot more nutrients onto that soil. Again, in sandy soils, which have a very low CEC, adding compost into those soils is going to increase the amount of nutrients you're able to hold. And that way, any nutrients you do put down onto your turf grass is going to be better utilized. It's going to allow for greater water infiltration. It allows water to actually get into the soil better. Clays and loamy sands over time tend to compact, which does not allow water to actually move into the surface, creating puddles. Those puddles on the surface can be very detrimental to turf grass. One, that it's not where the turf can actually use it, but it also creates anaerobic environments, which can be very dangerous for turf grass because turf actually needs some level of oxygen in it. Adding compost to your soils is going to increase that water infiltration, allowing water to actually get into soil faster, and so you actually have less puddling. Being organic matter itself, it is a source of nutrients. So you are going to have, as it breaks down, as the microbial activity breaks that organic matter down, it's going to release things like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and depending on what type of, what was the source of your compost, you could get a lot of your micronutrients as well, things like calcium, magnesium, iron. And you see these benefits when you actually put compost down onto an area. A lot of the soils within Virginia are very acidic soils, so adding compost is also going to increase the soil pH, bringing it up to the acceptable levels. Typical soils within Virginia are going to run naturally about 5 to 5.5. Where we would like to see soils for best or for optimum turf grass growth is going to be between 6 to 6.5. So adding compost is going to actually give you an ability to increase that soil pH, meaning you may not have to lime as much. And finally, as a soil amendment, it can actually help relieve compaction. As I said, clay and loam soils tend to compact over time, creating an environment that can be very detrimental to turf grass, make it very hard to grow, not allow water infiltration, not allow those roots to spread out the way they would like to. And adding organic matter into that soil can break up that compaction over time and not allow the soil to recompact if you do some kind of cultivation event, so that soil does not get back into a state that becomes detrimental. I'm going to talk about some compost applications in turf grass, mostly how you can actually use compost in turf grass at establishment and then also on an existing stand. When it comes to composting at establishment, I'm going to be looking at incorporation versus top dressing on your soil. I'll talk a little bit about the amounts you are going to need with each of these different types of usage of compost, and then what kind of results you can expect to see using compost versus not using compost. Also look at using compost on an existing stand. If we already have a stand of turf grass, how to actually incorporate that compost into the stand. I'll talk again about the amounts that you're going to want to use when it comes to these, using and getting the compost into the ground, the timing of when you want to be using the compost, and then again, what you can expect to see using compost versus not using compost. So using compost at establishment, you do have two methods. Your first method is going to be incorporation. Incorporation means you are actually going to blend that compost into your soil, okay? When you do this, you're actually able to use a lot more compost at this time. This is a very good time because you really get a major change of your soil complex when you use it and incorporate it at the time of establishment. We did research where we were looking at spreading 2 inches of compost over our plots and starting Bermuda grass seed from starting Bermuda grass seed in July of 2012. Now, how much is 2 inches of compost going to be? What you do to figure out how much that is going to be, you multiply 0.1667 by the square foot of the area that you're going to be using. That will actually give you the cubic feet of compost that you are going to need for that area. Taking that cubic feet, most distributors will be able to figure out exactly how much you're going to need if you know the cubic feet you will need in terms of the amount of compost. Also, most big box stores like Home Depot, Walmart, Lowe's, they all have bags of compost. And when you actually look at the amount that is in each of those bags, it will be presented in a terms of cubic footage. That way you can figure out, I know how much cubic feet I need total. I know how much cubic feet is in each bag. I can then divide the cubic feet in the that I need by the cubic feet in the bag and tell me exactly how much I need. You spread that compost over the soil, and then you want to till it into the top 2 inches of soil. That tilling is what really gets that compost incorporated into it. You having the compost just kind of spread on the top as a medium in itself, compost can be can cause a lot of issues as it will end up holding too much water over time. So you really do want to incorporate it into the top layer of soil. And that's where you want to till it into the soil so that you get a blend of compost and your soil. Once you've finished off tilling it in, you do want to rake the area smooth. And then you want to seed your turf grass at an appropriate rate. So that depends what turf grass am I trying to establish. If you are trying to establish your warm season grasses, things like Bermuda grass, zoysia grass, or centipede grass, you're going to be using about 1 pound to 2 pounds of grass per 1,000 square feet. If we're talking about tall fescue, that's going to be somewhere between 5 to 7 pounds of tall fescue seed per 1,000 square feet. Once you've actually seeded that seed into your area that is prepped, you do want to lightly rake that seed into the soil to really establish a good seed to soil contact. If you don't have the ability to actually incorporate the compost into your soil, there are other methods. The other method is to top dress it. When you top dress it, you do want to lightly aerate or power rake the area that you're going to use. You want to break up that soil somehow. Trying to establish seed onto compacted soils can be very, very difficult. That seed's going to be very difficult to root into those compacted soils. So you want to somehow break that up. Once you have broken it up, you want to seed your turf grass at the appropriate rate. And then you want to spread a thin layer of compost over top of it. That thin layer, we're talking about 1/4 inch of compost. What that compost is going to do, it's going to act as a blanket over top of that over top of that seed in that soil. And over time, it will kind of incorporate, but it's that initial blanket of the compost that provides the most benefit to the seed. And I'll show you in a couple of slides exactly what that is going to look like. How you figure out that how much 1/4 inch of compost is going to be, you're going to multiply your square footage by 0.021. Again, that'll give you the cubic feet of compost that you are going to need. So this is some research that we actually did in Virginia Beach as I was saying, we were establishing Bermuda grass on this area. You can see what it was looking like prior to us incorporating any of our compost treatments. We actually did till up the area, break up that soil pretty well, and then we actually put the compost down. We put 2 inches of the compost down, and then we tilled that compost into those treatment areas. So that compost was nicely tilled and incorporated into the soil. You can see the difference between where we have compost versus where we don't. So after we seeded it, of course, we got some irrigation up on it. And you can see one of the main things that having the compost incorporated into, I was talking about that soil infiltration. You can see back here on some of our plots where we did till it. So we broke up that soil. But even with breaking up that soil and then seeding it, you still have trouble with that soil or with that water infiltration, and you tend to get puddling. That puddling can move seed, especially some of your smaller seeds. And so you want to avoid that kind of occurrence. Having the compost is going to increase that water infiltration, and you're going to have, you can see where you don't see any puddling on your composted plots. Now, Bermuda grass seed in general takes a lot more time, a longer time to germinate than you see with your tall fescues and some of your ryegrasses, where those take about 5 to 6 days to germinate. Your Bermuda grasses can take anywhere from 14 to 21 days to actually germinate, depending on the situation. And we can see here in our non-composted plots that we actually don't have a lot of Bermuda grass germinating, but what you do see in that 14 to 21 days, there's going to be other things trying to germinate. A lot of weed seed. There is lots of weed seed in your soil that is just lying dormant, waiting for the opportunity. When you till up the ground, you move that weed seed to the surface. And so you can see in the time that it takes for Bermuda grass to germinate, you've got a lot of weeds coming in. Whereas in our compost plots, you don't see a lot of that weed seed germinating, okay? And what we were able to determine, what happened is you get, when you incorporate that compost into the soil, you dilute how much weed seed is in there. You're adding to the soil the volume to the soil that dilutes that weed seed, can kind of push it down, and it allowed the Bermuda grass to actually germinate. So we got better germination with our compost when we incorporated it. And we monitored these plots for a couple of years. We were adding compost, and I'll show you exactly how we were doing that in a little bit. But compost versus non-compost, you can see after 2 years, the composted plots were much further along. You had a better stand of Bermuda grass, whereas when you didn't have compost, you tended to have weeds run wild over those. The Bermuda didn't establish very well, which meant the weeds were going to be the more dominant species. So the benefits of compost were just much greater than not having it. What about top dressing? Well, one of the things that we have found when it comes to actually Bermuda grass germination and Bermuda grass establishment is our timing can actually be off. We've learned that you can actually start your Bermuda grass in much colder months than was originally thought. Typically, we tell people you got to wait until your last frost occurs to actually put out your Bermuda seed. For down here in Virginia Beach, that's going to be something along the lines of April 15th to April 21st. Up in Williamsburg, that's going to be almost till the 1st of May. But we've learned that if you actually put the seed down, it will germinate when nature tells it it's ready. And we've developed this practice called dormant seeding. Now, this practice was utilized by a park and rec manager up in Culpeper County, Virginia, where he wanted to actually use this process. What he did, he aerated his area to actually break up that soil, gave it a light aeration. He then seeded his Bermuda grass at 1.5 pounds per 1,000 square feet on March 25th. Now, Culpeper, their last frost date, they can actually go until middle of May, almost June, before they've been historically been said, okay, that's the time to actually to put out your Bermuda grass seed. But he wanted to try this method on a field to see if he could get it up and going earlier. Put out his seed. He then came along with that 1/4 inch of top dressing. And in this scenario, what that top dressing not only does, it provides that blanket, but it also, that black color attracts sunlight and it heats up the soil so that soil does not freeze the way it normally would if it was just bare soil. The 1/4 inch compost kind of covering the whole area, spread out nice and thin. And what we were able to see, 18 days after seeding, he was getting germination in Culpeper County. So we're talking, this is, he seeded on March 25th. So middle of April, he is starting to get germination of Bermuda grass seed in a very, very cool environment. And that compost was not only provided, some nutrients, not only provided a little more water holding capacity, but the color itself actually provided additional warmth, or the ability to keep that soil warm and germinate that seed faster. So what he was able to do, this is a picture, this is 2 months after he actually seeded those areas. He's got a very, very nice stand of Bermuda grass long before, or he would have normally thought, okay, this is about the time he would have been seeding, but he's already got a stand of it. And it's that compost top dressing that really provided him the ability to do so. 1 month later, he's got a stand of Bermuda grass that's actually able to be played on.
Played on.
Compost on post-established turf grass. So what do we do if we already have our stand of turf grass? Okay. One of the big things we can do, we can top dress it. Top dressing is going to be just like it would with the establishment. You're going to apply a 1/4 inch of compost over top of your area. You want to then spread that into the turf grass with a rake, either a leaf rake or a hard rake. You want to work that compost into the canopy as best as possible. You can see in the photograph, Dr. Goatley really working that compost in there. You don't want to just leave that compost on the top of the turf grass. Remember, turf grass is a plant. It needs the sun to actually produce photosynthesis. So you want to work that compost down into the canopy, get as much of that grass visible as possible. You can also couple it with a cultivation event. It works really well if you have warm season grasses to use on an established turf grass, to use it with verticutting if you need to verticut due to thatch issues, or when you're talking about aerating your tall fescue, adding compost after aeration or verticutting is going to provide these all of those benefits, along with help recuperate from these injurious events. When you're going to do this, that's going to be based on your turf grass species. So if you're talking about warm season grasses and you're talking about verticutting, you're going to be doing that late May, early June. So that's when you're going to want to be putting out your compost in these time frames. You want the plant to be able to utilize it as best as possible. you're talking about aerating tall fescue or any of your cool season grasses, that's going to be done in September or October. So you're going to want to put the compost down in at that time frame. How much you're going to put down? You're still only going to be using very small amounts. You'll be spreading out a 1/4 inch of compost, or if it's coupled with one of these events, you can actually move it up to 1/2 inch of compost, because you want to fill in where that damaged area is. You want to provide a medium for that stuff to grow into. Again, you want to work it into that canopy as best as you possibly can. And the good thing is you can even use it to follow up your fall seeding. It can be used as kind of a blanket, just kind of the way it was used top dressing at establishment. It'll fill into those holes that you created when you were aerating and seeding, and provide nutrients, provide that water holding capacity, and provide a little protection for that seed. What this looks like, we did another study on established Bermuda grass as to how incorporating the compost into an established stand. You can see these are what our plots were looking like prior to us putting down compost. This is April. They're just coming out of dormancy. They don't look really good, and they look kind of, you don't see any one plot greener than the other. A month after adding that compost, you can definitely tell the plots that had compost versus the ones that didn't. That's that added nutrients that it's getting. It's that added color, being able to green up that turf grass a whole lot faster than it would naturally. You can see without compost, it still has kind of that lime green color to it. It's still just barely coming out of dormancy. So adding it at that point is going to have great benefits. Where this can be used for things like your cool season grasses, putting out compost right now. We're starting to make that turn from winter into spring. Putting it out on your tall fescue lawns right now will give it a boost, get it starting to go, and have it start to mature a little faster, so that as it comes into those hot months of June, July, August, it's a little bit further along than if you kind of let it come out of dormancy on its own. That could take until the end of March, could take until middle of April, but putting a little compost on it now would not hurt it at all. But compost does not come without its pitfalls. One of the big things is the source of compost matters. Not all composts are the same. You do want to read the label, figure out where that compost is actually being derived from, how it's being composted. Compost is, when it is being composted by companies, gets done in either one of two manners. It is either the soil aerated, stagnant and aerated, or it is windrowed, where they have to flip it over every couple of days. Compost in general, the standards are it has to reach a certain temperature to actually be considered compost, or be warm enough to say that the organic matter is actually breaking down. And there's an excellent resource here. It is the SPS 51. It is a PDF document that is the Mid-Atlantic Compost Directory. It has sources of compost that you can get throughout the state of Virginia, Maryland, or even Delaware. And it tells you what type of compost they are using, how it is actually compost, and how it is available to the general public. So with compost, I also say, because compost is a soil amendment, as a soil amendment and it being a nutrient to it, it has to have the nutrient contents, meaning it has to tell you what amount of nitrogen it's going to provide. It's going to have to tell you how the amount of phosphorus and the amount of potassium it's providing. So read the label so you understand how much you actually are getting in terms of those benefits when you're putting out your compost. Other pitfall for compost, disease introduction. With cool season grasses and warm season grasses, your biggest downfall in terms of management of your turf grass is going to be diseases. And when it comes to tall fescue, your biggest disease is always going to be Rhizoctonia solani, known as brown patch. The unfortunate thing with compost is compost in itself, the process, research has shown, does not eliminate Rhizoctonia. Therefore, putting out compost, you are potentially introducing, if that source had Rhizoctonia in it prior to them composting it, you know, if it's a grass leaf source, they took clippings from an area that had Rhizoctonia in it, they then composted it, that Rhizoctonia is not going to be killed off by the composting process. Therefore, you could potentially be introducing Rhizoctonia into your ground. Rhizoctonia is a soil-borne disease, so adding compost as a soil amendment is a potential for disease introduction. In the same instance, you could also be introducing weed seed. While most of your seeds will germinate and die off in that composting process, weeds tend to do very, very weird things in nature. They tend to survive certain situations and they're just waiting around to get their opportunity. And so adding compost could be a potential source for weed introduction. You could have weeds that you may never have had in your lawn before. And you're wondering, where did these come from? That compost could have potentially been a source of that weed introduction. So as I say, mostly with compost, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to be the thing you're going to be able to add and it's going to make everything better. It will have its benefits, absolutely, but it is still only one part of your integrated pest management, meaning you still are going to have proper irrigation management. You're going to still have to have proper disease management. Still going to have to manage your turf properly, meaning if you're dealing with tall fescue, mowing it at 4 inches, not breaking the 1/3 rule. So those are all things that you have to consider as you are thinking about putting compost out. So that is all I have as far as the work we've done with compost. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up to questions. So first question I've got up here, how often should compost be applied to a cool season lawn that is aerated and overseeded annually? So as I said, you could actually apply compost now at the 1/4 inch and give it that benefit right now, kind of wake it up. And then if you're aerating and seeding in the fall, put the compost down when you actually are doing that aeration and seeding. It will provide the benefits for that seed to have a better germination. You will have a better establishment when done in that manner. So.
Yeah, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to come off mute.
Yeah, I do. For Adam.
Yes.
This is John Morgan here. I've got a problem with moss. I know we have trees, and one of the people that I've talked to from the extension program told me that until we get rid of all the trees, there's going to be a moss problem. Short of having 100-foot oak trees taken off of the property, is there anything else you can recommend that uses compost or other sources to take care of making sure that the grass grows in a mossy environment?
So moss in general is an indication of poor soils. So yes, and you know, because the soils are poor, you don't have grass growing in there. They tend to be in acidic environments. They tend to be in shaded environments. So in those areas, if you were to do some either heavy aeration to break up that moss in there and then incorporate your compost into those areas, it is going to help that area. It's going to improve the soil characteristics. To figure out exactly what your soil characteristics are, I definitely suggest in those areas taking a soil test, getting that soil tested. You'll be able to find exactly how low your pH is going to be. And then, like I said, aerating and following it up with compost is going to not allow that soil to get as compacted. And you do that, you know, you do that in the fall, you do it again early spring, and over time that you will change those dynamics of that soil. And so you will improve the amount of tall fescue or whatever grass you want to grow into those areas. Now, I will say there are certain environments grass will not grow. And depending on how heavy that shade is, it may be that, you know, it's just an environment that grass itself may not grow. And in those situations, I tend to, you know, say, look for more shade-loving plants, you know, things like hostas and certain shade-loving ground covers other than moss. But even those, in those situations, if the soil is not conducive and the moss is still coming through, I'd look at what exactly the soil, the nature of the soil is.
Okay.
So from Dennis, what is the best way to apply compost on an existing tall fescue lawn? Just as you know, we said in the presentation, how I have done it, how I did it in our trials was I would figure out how much I needed in those areas, and I would apply it. I would get it dumped on the top, and then it took a lot of raking to move it around and down into the soil and spread it out over that area. If it's in bags, it tends to be a lot easier because your piles that you're spreading are a lot smaller. Is there pelleted compost that can be applied with a lawn spreader? No, because compost generally tends to be is a wet material. So when you pop it out of the bag, there's going to be quite a bit of moisture in there. So I would not recommend trying to use a lawn spreader in that manner. So a 1/4 inch is not as much as people tend to think it is, but it is some. And just getting it on the ground, raking it in is definitely going to be the best way to get it in. And you'll see, you know, you will have some areas that, especially if you've got some thin areas where you'll see the compost kind of on the surface, spreading that out as best you can. Those areas will fill in definitely over time. Any other questions?
It looks like we've got one more from the chat. What's the best way to obtain compost that reduces potential for Rhizoctonia disease?
So that's, again, checking out your source. So understand, one of the things I would say is, if it is the way you're most likely to get Rhizoctonia is going to be if it is a source that comes from like lawn clippings. Lawn clippings are going to be the most possible way. As far as, has there been research that shows that compost does induce Rhizoctonia? There actually has not been. And so that's why I say it's only, I say it's a possibility. I just know the research that I have seen on compost has shown that compost does not eliminate these diseases. So the other source that I always worry about is mushroom compost. I've been trying to figure out whether or not mushroom compost can be another source of possible Rhizoctonia, because mushrooms happen to be what they do. They get a compost, they then grow the mushrooms on top of it, remove the mushrooms, and then sell the compost as mushroom compost. It's not compost that's actually coming from mushrooms as the organic source. But those mushrooms are typically in the same class of mushrooms as Rhizoctonia. So I'm always leery about using that as a source. So look at the source, and I would say try to avoid, if you have tall fescue, if it is a primarily grass clippings, but it's not a surefire that if you get grass clipping compost, you're gonna get Rhizoctonia. That's definitely not the case.
All right, that is the last question I see in the chat. Do we have anyone else who wants to come off mute and ask a question? Otherwise, Adam, thank you so much for providing this presentation. I thought it was really helpful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate it. So like I said, this webinar will be posted online, and you'll also receive a link to the recording via email next week. So I hope you all get to enjoy this sunshine we've got for the rest of the afternoon. And again, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.